I'm Teikwe Di, child of the Kwashki Kwan. I'm Simshan and Tlingit, and I'm pleased to welcome you here today for our special lecture series. Thank you for joining us online to our SHI YouTube channel. You can find a variety of our programming available on our channel. For those of us who are here in the room, please remember to silence your cell phones. We don't want any distractions today. The special topic discussion today is presented by SHI President Rosita Kahani Worl, who's a distinguished anthropologist and lecturer. Dr. Worl will present on native identity, blood quantum, and the ways policies around blood quantum are increasingly affecting Alaska Native youth. Our program today and all other SHI programming is open to all participants but would not be possible without private support. Private contributions can be directed to specific areas of programming, such as Baby Raven Reads, or Celebration, or to the area of greatest need. This year, we're pleased to be hosting our first in-person celebration since 2018, this June 8th through the 11th, and Celebration is a huge event that we rely on private support to make successful. Donors who give to Celebration are recognized in a variety of ways, including having your name listed in the program and in the event itself. You can give online at sealaskaheritage.org/donate. At the end of the discussion today, there will be an opportunity for question and answer. Please type your questions in the chat, and welcome Dr. Worl. Thanks.
Thank you very much, David. And I want to, on a personal note, first of all, welcome my sister from California who's here with us today. Make sure you pan on her, Carmen. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you all for allowing me to spend some time with you today to talk about two issues that are of great concern, notably to our younger population, Indian identity and blood quantum. Before I begin my discussion, let me provide you with my own cultural identity. In our traditional society, someone who was an opposite moiety would introduce me. Today we have identified new protocols since we cannot be assured that someone of the proper moiety will be present to introduce us. Yedetlata kakahani yuchat duasak, jak na ayachat, shangu kedi nach chatsati, kaudliyai hitdach ayachat, juskat kwan ayachat, klukachadi dachhank ayachat. My Tlingit names are Yodeklitzak. It's an ancient name that has been handed down through generations within our clan, and its meaning has been lost in antiquity. My ceremonial name is Kahani, which means woman who stands in the place of the man. I share that name with my sister Sandy. This name recalls an historical event involving intertribal trade, and it speaks to the status of women in our society. The name Kahani also reflects the bonds that exist between clans, and in this case, the bonds between the Kagwantan and the Shangukedi clans. I am an eagle of the Thunderbird clan and the house lord from the sun in Klakwan in the Chalkat region. I am a grandchild of the Sakai clan. I am entitled to use the eagle, Thunderbird, and Sun clan crests and the white bear, killer whale, and shark spirit designs. My identity reflects our ties to our ancestors and our real and spiritual relationship to our land, environment, and universe. In addition, our clan claims ownership rights to the U.S. Naval military uniform and to the name Lieutenant Frederick Schwatka. Under our law, because Lieutenant Schwatka failed to pay a debt to my great-great-clan grandfather, the Thunderbird clan claimed his name and the naval uniform or semblances of them as liability payments. Now let's take a look at Indian identity. Indian identity is based on three categories: biological, cultural, and legal. Biological definitions of Indian identity. Biological definitions are based on an individual's genetic relationship to mother, father, and grandparents. The initial calculation for most tribes' biological definitions begins with a base roll. The roll is a listing of tribal membership and blood quanta in some particular year. The most significant base roles for Alaska Natives and Southeast Alaska Natives are the following. We have the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, and in our region, it's Sealaska and the village and urban corporations. We also have membership in the Central Council of Tlingit and Haida Indian Tribes of Alaska, and also the Metlakatla Rolls and other individual tribes. We will see later that these roles are also the basis of a legal identity. The issue of biological identity and blood quantum did not originate in the ideas and experiences of Indian tribes. Instead, the federal government used the blood quantum standard as a means to liquidate tribal lands and to eliminate government trust responsibility to tribes. The federal government applies the blood quantum standard to determine eligibility for entitlement programs. Let's look at the cultural definitions of Indian identity. Anthropologists define culture as a system of symbols and meanings around which people organize their lives and interpret their experience. Culture is not a thing, but a view of the world that guides people's actions. A person's cultural identity is the realization of cultural values in social action. External markers of cultural identity include language, food, clothing, arts, and physical traits. More subtle markers of identity include attitudes, conception of time, conception of oneself, ways of communicating. Although a person's cultural identity can be read to some extent from these markers, cultural identity is realized in people's action and is not a fixed list of traits. Cultural definitions of Indian identity have also been used for legal consideration. Perhaps the most persuasive has been the need to define and substantiate Indian cultures legally for purposes of land claims. Even Indian tribes, which have retained their language, sacred stories, songs, ceremonies, and traditional relationships to the land they occupy, have been legally challenged as abandoning real traditional culture. The legal interpretations and applications defining and identifying groups as Indians have been varied. For example, the 1869 New Mexico Territory Supreme Court decision held that the Pueblo were a peaceful, quiet, and industrious people residing in villages, lived by the cultivation of the soil. Note, these traits were also considered to be non-Indian. The court noted that these traits made them very different from the general class of Indians who were wild, half-naked, and wandering savages. The court concluded that the Pueblos could be treated as Indians for legal purposes. In 1913, the Supreme Court in the United States versus Sandoval rethought the initial judgment of the Pueblos. It observed that the Pueblos were persistently pagan, that they were largely influenced by superstition and fetishism, and chiefly governed according to crude customs inherited from their ancestors. In addition, they were frequently unreceptive to the extensions of railroads and unenthusiastic about the benefits of schools and churches. The court concluded that they were like other Indians after all. Given these legal, historical, cultural definitions of Indians, some Indians have been concerned about the prominence of cultural definitions of identity. Cultural definitions that emerge out of the dominant society are frequently based on stereotypic expectations of what constitutes a real Indian. This, as we saw in the case of the Pueblo, caused considerable anguish for them. Applying cultural definitions of Indian identity at the individual level is also problematic. Here in Juneau, we can see Indians who are actively engaged in the social, political, and ceremonial life of the Tlingit, while others appear to be totally disengaged from the Native community. Considerable variation of participation exists among individuals between these two extreme ranges. A definition centered on what people actually and consistently do makes more intuitive sense than do definitions of law or biology. Some Indians found it odd that Indians without any connections to tribal culture would nevertheless identify themselves as connected to the tribe. In some cases, Indians can meet the legal definitions of Indian identity, but not the cultural definitions. So let's look at legal card-carrying Indians. The legal identities of Indians are defined by both federally recognized tribes and by the federal government. Federally recognized tribes have a legal and political relationship with the federal government. They are political entities and are recognized as dependent sovereign nations. Note, there are both federally recognized tribes and tribes which are not federally recognized. Some non-federally recognized tribes are recognized by their respective state governments. As sovereign entities, federally recognized tribes have the legal authority to define who is considered to be a member of their tribe. Federally recognized Indians have dual citizenship. They are citizens of their respective tribes as well as citizens of the United States. The most common requirement for determining tribal citizenship is based on individual blood quantum or degree of Indian ancestry. More than 2/3 of all federally recognized tribes specify a minimum blood quantum with 1/4 blood degree, being the most frequent minimum requirement. The remaining 1/3 of Indian tribes have no minimum blood quantum. They often simply require that any new enrollee be a lineal or direct descendant of another tribal member. Tribal legal definitions may take into consideration other factors besides biological descent. Certain tribes require that this ancestry come from a particular parent. For example, the Santa Clara Pueblo require a paternal descent. The Seneca tribe of New York requires maternal descent. Such descent requirements are based on the traditional practice of reckoning kinship or descent. Some tribes consider residency. Such tribes grant automatic citizens to all citizens born to parents living on reservations. Some tribes require residency on reservations to maintain citizenship. The Swinomish of Washington consider various indicators of community participation while ignoring blood quantum. The Lower Sioux Indian community of Minnesota and the Metlakatla Indian community require a vote of the tribal council. As we might imagine, political considerations may be taken into account in voting on an individual's membership. We shall see later that financial considerations may also affect voting considerations and membership in tribes. Some tribes require parental enrollment as a means or a prerequisite for enrollment. Some tribes also require members to fulfill certain minimal duties, such as maintaining annual contact with the tribal council. Legal definitions of tribal memberships regulate rights to vote in tribal elections, to hold tribal office, and to participate in the political and sometimes also the cultural life of the tribe. Tribal membership may also determine one's right to share in certain tribal revenues, such as income generated through tribally owned businesses. Let's look at federal government definitions. The federal government has its own separate legal definitions of Indians. The U.S. Constitution uses the word Indian in 2 places, but it defines it nowhere. However, at least 33 separate definitions are found in different legislation. These definitions may or may not correspond with those definitions adopted by a tribe to determine its citizenship. Most federal legal definitions of Indian identity specify a minimum blood quantum. It is frequently set at 1/4, but sometimes at 1/2. Benefits available to those who can satisfy federal definitions of Indian identity are administered through a variety of agencies, including the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Indian Health Service, the Department of Agriculture, the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, and the Department of Labor, to name a few. Legal definitions also affect specific economic rights deriving from treaties or agreements that some, not all, tribes made with the federal government. Legal identity also determines the applicability of a number of protections available to individual Indians from the federal government, such as the Indian Child Welfare Act and the Religious Freedom Act. For example, peyote is considered illegal. However, the government allows Indians to use it in their religious ceremonies. Indians may use eagle feathers for their ceremonies, although non-Indians are not permitted to possess any part of this endangered species. Federal definitions of Indian identity can even affect some individuals' ability to pursue their livelihood. For example, the Indian Arts and Crafts Act of 1990 forbids any artist who is not a citizen of a federally recognized or state-recognized tribe to market their work that suggests that it is Indian-produced or it is an Indian product. The legal definitions have also allowed Indian people to claim certain privileges that other minorities do not enjoy. One such privilege is the right to benefit from Indian preference in federal employment or contracts. The courts have ruled that Indian preference does not imply racial discrimination because Indian refers to the context to a political rather than a racial status. This is really important to know, that it is a political status that Indians have, and it's not based on their racial status or their biological status. Under the terms of ANCSA, Alaska Natives were eligible to enroll in a Native corporation if their blood quanta were 1/4 Alaska Native. An individual was recognized as an Alaska Native with any combination of Inupiat, Yupik, Aleut, Athabascan, Tlingit, or Tsimshian that cumulatively met the 1/4 blood quantum. The classification of Alaska Natives is a new Indian identity. When Europeans first arrived in Alaska, beginning in 1741, there were no Alaska Natives. We were Tlingit, Haida, Tsimshian, and members of other indigenous groups. Initially, the Alaska Native identity was imposed on the indigenous population, irrespective of groups identifying themselves by their own tribal or cultural designation. This new identity was legally formalized with ANCSA. Let's look at individual legal identities. The legal rights and protections offer significant advantages to those who can successfully meet the legal definitions. However, many individuals cannot meet the definitions of identity imposed by the government or even by their own tribe. We may have, for example, an Indian who is a full-blooded Indian, but not able to meet the tribal requirements for citizenship. Recall that different tribes have different requirements for tribal memberships, such as requirements of 1/4 blood quanta or patrilineal or matrilineal descent. Now let's take a look at blood quantum. Alaska Native people have collectively identified themselves in their self-designation or native language as the real people. However, the 1867 Treaty of Cession between the United States and Russia identified Alaska Natives as, quote, uncivilized tribes. 20 years later, the blood quantum system was introduced into American Indian public policy and law and initially applied to Native Americans under the General Allotment Act of 1887. The twofold purpose of the Allotment Act was, first, to obtain lands for Americans, and second, to civilize and assimilate the Indians by introducing them to the concept of private property that was held by individuals rather than the communally based membership of tribes. Under the Allotment Act, some 90 million acres of land were transferred to the public domain or to non-Native Americans. The concept of blood quantum references the portion of an individual's genetic heritage that is presumed to come from a Native American. Blood quantum was also used by the federal government as a measure of competency or assimilation. If a Native American was less than 50% Native blood, he or she was deemed to be competent, and the BIA was not required to supervise the allottee or to have a legal trust responsibility over the allottee and his or her allotment. The allottee was free to sell his or her allotment. However, a native with 50% or more Native blood was viewed as incompetent and required BIA supervision. The federal government began to systematically apply the blood quantum criteria to determine Native identity. It was used as a criteria to determine eligibility to enroll in Native entities and or to participate in Native programs. Blood quantum is used by the federal government primarily for the purposes of determining eligibility for benefits arising from treaties or federal policy. Blood quantum was also a criteria that was used to determine eligibility to enroll into Alaska Native corporations and to participate in Native programs. Existing data clearly shows a historical trend of diminishing Native blood quantum among Native Americans and Alaska Natives. Blood quantum has become an issue of increasing interest and concern in the Native community. Let's look at Native values and ownership of land. Native societies differ from Western societies in multiple ways. One of the major differences is that Alaska Native societies are group-oriented rather than individually oriented, which is a characteristic of non-Native societies. Tribes or clans, rather than the individual, owned land. Additionally, Natives also maintain a spiritual relationship with their land, flora, and fauna, which is a foreign concept in Western societies. Laws are a reflection of their society. Thus, in Native societies, laws are developed around group rights. As a member of a tribe or a clan, children share in the ownership of their land through their membership in the group. Children did not share in the ownership of their land through any inheritance mechanism, which is characteristic of Western societies. It is often said that Native peoples begin their speeches with the statement, "We have owned and occupied our homelands since time immemorial." Our history reveals that our ancestors vigilantly guarded our ownership of our lands against all intruders in accordance with our core cultural values. The Russians arrived in Alaska in 1741. Although they did not set foot on Alaska's land, under international law, the Russians were deemed to be the discoverers of Alaska and the rightful owners. In their quest for sea otter furs, the Russians near annihilated the Alutiiq and the Anungan populations. When Russia sold Alaska to the United States, many Native Alaska populations had never seen a Russian and were unaware that Russia had claimed Alaska. When the Russians attempted to usurp Native lands, the Southeast Alaska Natives went to war with them. When they sold Alaska to the United States, the Southeast Alaska Natives met in council to decide whether they should wage war against the United States. They wisely chose not to engage in a military encounter. Our grandparents told the United States officials that if they wanted to buy Alaska, then they must buy it from its rightful owners, the Alaska Natives. Native leaders soon learned that they would have to use Western institutions and laws to protect our land ownership and our civil rights. Alaska Natives, under the Alaska Federation of Natives, went to bring their land claims battle to Congress. Now let's take a look at the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act of 1971. The Native leaders did not want to be subject to the BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs. They had learned of the tragedy experienced by our tribal brothers and sisters in the lower 48. The BIA controlled reservations, lands, and land allotment. Young Native men went off to war only to return to find that the government had leased their lands to non-Native ranchers or farmers for 99 years. Reservation lands were often leased to non-Native developers for a fraction of their value. It is a common misconception that corporations were thrust upon Alaska Natives. Granted, corporations were an alien construct to Alaska Natives, but the Alaska Native leaders wanted full ownership and control of their lands. When our historical leaders learned that control and ownership of lands was possible if lands were held under fee simple title, which could be held by individuals or corporations, they elected to go with corporations. Ironically, the decision meshed with the goals of the government officials who also supported corporations, but for very different reasons. With corporations, land, and a financial settlement, Congress reasoned that the assimilation of Alaska Natives into economic mainstream would be a natural outcome. Suppression of Native cultures and assimilation into the American society remained as a federal Indian policy objective during the 1960s, and some would say even later. ANCSA adopted the 1/4 blood quantum criteria to determine eligibility in Native corporations. The government proposed the 1/4 blood quantum based on previous federal legislation and BI definitions establishing the criteria for American Indians. The 1/4 blood quantum to determine eligibility for Native programs was the common practice of the federal government at the time of the passage of ANCSA. ANCSA also included, in the absence of proof of a minimum blood quantum, citizens who are regarded as an Alaska Native by the Native village or Native group of which the individual claimed to be a member and whose father or mother, or if deceased, was regarded as Native. ANCSA excluded Tsimshians who were enrolled with the Metlakatla Indian community. ANCSA was also legally created a new ethnic classification identity with the designation of Native or Alaska Native. An Alaska Native is an individual who is a person of 1/4 degree or more Indian, including Tsimshian Indians not enrolled in the Metlakatla Indian community, Eskimo or Aleut blood, or a combination thereof. The ability to combine blood quantum differs from other Native American tribes that require a 1/4 Native blood quantum from a single tribe. It is possible for an individual to be a full-blooded Native American but not eligible to enroll in his or her mother's or father's tribe who are enrolled to different tribes. The term Alaska Native arose from a construction needed by the government to have a term that includes all ethno-linguistic and cultural groups of Alaska. Let's take a look at the ANCSA 1987 amendments. As noted previously, Congress viewed ANCSA as a vehicle to assimilate Alaska Natives into Western society with corporations, cash, and private property. The Native leadership and community rejected Congress's goal and moved to amend ANCSA or to re-tribalize ANCSA. The restriction on the enrollment of Alaska Natives for a limited generation or those who were alive in 1971 was a flaw that Alaska Natives did not recognize until the 1980s. Recall that in some Native societies, children are born as members of their tribes with all of the attendant rights of an adult tribal member. Excluding Native children born after 1971 from the ownership of their lands conflicted with Native culture and were violations of traditional values and practices. Once Alaska Natives understood the flaws of ANCSA, they realized that they were going to need to amend ANCSA. They supported amendments to ANCSA that would allow for the enrollment of children born after 1971 into ANCs. However, they did not fully assess the impacts of the 1/4 Native blood quantum restriction in their deliberations of the ANCSA amendments. Alaska Natives also sought other amendments that they saw as necessary to protect their cultural survival and the ownership of their lands. They pursued provisions that would allow ANCs to provide special benefits to elders and to establish land banks. These Native leaders, like their predecessors, did not fight for land claims for only one generation of Natives to hold title to Native land. They did not consider the implication of the dilution of stock, nor did they conceive of land solely as an economic and corporate asset, as they fought strenuously to protect their subsistence rights and lifestyles. They did not think of ANCSA as a path towards assimilation. Rather, they were determined to ensure perpetual ownership of land and the protection of Native culture and cultural survival for future generations. They maintained that ANCSA and the proposed amendments represented a Native land claim settlement. Let's take a look at the Marine Mammal Protection Act. The 1/4 blood quantum requirement that has surfaced as an issue of concern under the Marine Mammal Protection Act of 1972. The MMPA, Alaska Native exemption to hunt marine mammals, was set at the 1/4 Native blood quantum. In 2016, Sealaska Heritage conducted a study entitled Determination of Alaska Native Status under the Marine Mammal Act, led by Dr. Steve Langdon, to determine the effects of the MMPA on Alaska Natives. The study reported on the Certificate of Indian Determination, CDIB, that were issued during a 10-year period to Alaska Natives from 2006 to 2016. The region with the highest number of Alaska Natives who are less than the 1/4 Native blood quantum are Seri at 59.3%, followed by Koniag at 59%. The regions with the lowest number of Alaska Natives who are less than the 1/4 Native blood quantum are Sealaska at 7.5%, followed by Nana at 13%. By July 2016, of all Alaska Natives who had applied for a CDIB, were nearly over 62,000 Alaska Natives who were less than the 1/4 Native blood quantum and were not eligible to hunt sea otters, a cultural tradition dating back thousands of years. The study did not report on the cumulative number of Alaska Natives with less than 1/4 Native blood quantum, but only those who had obtained a CIDB during the 10-year period. Thus, we can assume that the number of Alaska Natives with less than the 1/4 Native blood quantum is higher. We can also assume that today, in 2022, we have a higher number of Alaska Natives who are less than the 1/4 Native blood quantum than the 62,000 in 2016. Now let's take a look at Sealaska Corporation. The Sealaska Board of Directors made the decision to bring a resolution to the shareholders to vote on whether to issue life estate stock to shareholder descendants who were 1/4 Native blood quantum. A demographic study authorized by Sealaska projected by 2004 there would be 21,468 descendants, of which slightly less than half, or 9,910, or 46%, would be less than the 1/4 Native blood quantum. The study projected an increasing number of individuals who would be less than the 1/4 blood quantum. By 2008, The study projected that 59% of the descendants would be less than the 1/4 native blood quantum, an increase of 13% in 4 years. In June 2007, Sealaska shareholders voted on the resolution to allow for the enrollment of shareholder descendants who were born after 1971 and who were 1/4 Alaska Native to receive 100 shares of life estate stock. 57.22% voted yes. 41.06% voted no. The vote was significant in that it was what I have called an assimilationist indicator. The vote pitted the communal ownership of property of tribes versus the individual ownership of the American society. The majority of shareholders continued to adhere to the traditional cultural beliefs and values and had rejected the Western value of individualism as it applied to native land. In the resolution adopted by the Sealaska shareholders, the 1/4 native blood quantum eligibility requirement to become a shareholder was maintained, although natives who were less than the 1/4 native blood quantum could inherit or be gifted stock. Let's take a look at the Sealaska scholarship data. Another source of data on blood quantum can be abstracted from the Sealaska Scholarship Program. In the academic years 2011 to 2012, 38.58% of the scholarship applications were less than the 1/4 native blood quantum. In the academic year 2020 to 2021, 44% of the scholarship applicants were less than the 1/4 native blood quantum. Again, this is another indicator of the increasing number of Southeast Alaska Natives with less than the 1/4 native blood quantum. No similar data exists for shareholders and shareholder descendants who did not apply for scholarships. However, one could conceivably make the conjecture that the same percent of less than the 1/4 blood quantum applies to this population in the same age range of 18 to 25 years. Note that all shareholder descendants are eligible for Sealaska scholarships irrespective of their blood quantum. Of interest is the difference in the 1/4 native blood quantum between those scholarship recipients living in Alaska and those living outside of Alaska. In 2020, 25% living outside of Alaska were less than the 1/4 native blood quantum. In the same year, 18% living in Alaska were less than the 1/4 native blood quantum. I understand that some ANCs, such as Sealaska, are considering asking their shareholders to enroll shareholders who are lineal descendants irrespective of their blood quantum. Such discussions can be expected to be divisive. They will pit economic values versus cultural values, individual rights versus group rights, assimilation versus cultural survival. There can be no doubt that enrolling lineal descendants as shareholders into Native corporations will have financial impacts. Enrolling new shareholders will dilute the value of existing shares. Conversely, excluding a growing number of Natives from owning shares in their Native corporations, which provides a tangible tie to ancestral lands, can enhance our cultural survival as Native societies. 2 Native corporations, of which I am aware, have already adopted resolutions to allow for the enrollment of descendants who are less than the 1/4 Native blood quantum. They include the Arctic Slope Regional Corporation that provides for 2 different types of stock based on blood quantum. One type is the 1/4 and more Native blood quantum. The other are for those that are less than the 1/4 Native blood quantum. Sealaska Corporation, the region with the lowest number of natives who are less than the 1/4 Native blood quantum, allows for the enrollment of lineal descendants. I have noted earlier that some gaming tribes have councils that vote on memberships within their tribes, and that these decisions or vote are undoubtedly driven by financial considerations. We have seen in the last several years news articles about a new phenomenon in which different tribes are disenrolling tribal members. Instructive to this discussion is a recent presentation by Gabriel S. Galanda at Harvard University on March 4, 2022, entitled Tribal Neocolonialism and the Transmutation of Indigenous Kinship Societies. Garlanda provides a brief report on tribal gaming politicians violating indigenous birthrights by disenrolling tribal members. To date, 90 tribes, or 15% of the federally recognized tribes, have disenrolled 10,000 relatives. Countless tribes are no longer enrolling their babies and grandbabies. One has to wonder, what are the ultimate consequences of these tribes? In conclusion, I would like to note that the data from the MMPA study, the 2007 Sealaska projection of shareholder descendants, the Sealaska scholarship recipients, clearly points to an increasing number of Alaska Natives who are less than the 1/4 Native blood quantum. We have witnessed a resurgence and revitalization in cultural and language teaching and practices in Alaska Native communities. The assumption can be made that this resurgence will lead to a growing number of Alaska Natives moving to change the 1/4 Native blood quantum as a criteria for enrollment in a Native corporation and for the right to hunt sea mammals. However, we can assume that this also has been accompanied by a vocal number of shareholders, evident largely on social media, who appear to place preeminence on individualism and would oppose enrolling new shareholders. The hard data reveals that unless shareholder descendants who are less than the 1/4 Native blood quantum are enrolled into Native corporations and MMPA and other governmental programs that provide protections and benefits to Alaska Natives are amended, we will witness the exclusion of a significant number of Alaska Natives who are our children, our grandchildren, and those yet to come from ownership of their ancient tribal lands held by Native corporations and their heritage from hunting sea mammals. The ancestors of Native peoples fought for the protection of land ownership of Native land for future generations, as they saw land as the underlying foundation of Native cultural survival. They sought ways through Western institutions to protect Native land ownership. Following on their ancestors' actions, shareholders across a number of regions voted to enroll shareholder descendants and to re-tribalize their corporations as a Native institution. They challenged Congress's attempt to assimilate Natives and successfully sought to enroll shareholder descendants born after 1971. The question that must be posed and answered: could the exclusion of Alaska Natives who are less than the 1/4 Native blood quantum from enrollment into Native corporations and from hunting marine mammals ultimately lead to cultural extinction of Native societies? Thank you for this opportunity to provide this review of very important issues facing Native societies. Gwyneth.
Gwyneth Rosita, thank you so much for this important conversation. We have some questions coming in through the chat, and I'm encouraging those of you viewing online via YouTube to submit your questions in the chat. I'll just read them as they come in. So one question was, why is it so hard to get the BIA to make changes to people's records when there are errors in the recorded blood quantum? If you can speak on that. It's complicated.
I don't want to speak about BIA. I mean, we chose not to go to be under BIA for some reasons, because we disagreed with their policies. But the BIA, unfortunately, has to live with fiscal constraints. And I suspect that it is the fiscal constraints that they have. I know they have good workers, so it has to be the fiscal constraints that causes the delays or the lack of action. So I'm sorry about that, but they do serve as the trustees, for Alaska Native tribes, and we do have to support the BIA and maybe help them try to get more funding so that they can operate efficient organizations.
Great, thank you. What is the potential for genes to be a marker for biological identity as Indigenous, Alaska Native, or Tlingit?
Exactly. I mean, biological definitions come from your genetic being, your genetic ancestry. So yes.
Do you think the fact that some tribes and Alaska Native corporations rely on the 1/4 blood quantum standard helps perpetuate its use, the 1/4 blood quantum, by federal regulators such as NOAA in terms of the MMPA?
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, those organizations will point to Native corporations and say that's the criteria that they have established and adopted. But as you might know, there have been efforts to amend the MMPA 1/4 Native blood quantum, but unfortunately in Alaska we do not yet have consensus on the right approach. But I do understand that very recently a resolution was adopted that appears to unify the Native position on the 1/4 blood quantum by looking at tribal membership and also having the tribes make those decisions about who is eligible rather than the federal government. So that amendment would say it would be up to the tribes to make that decision. So I'm expecting that that's a resolution, an action that will go before Congress at some point in time.
Great. Are there any resources or advice for those who are trying to get enrolled but are having trouble?
Are there
any resources, or do you have any advice for individuals who are trying to enroll, whether it be with maybe a tribe or a corporation? It's a question that came in.
I mean, if they are, right now, if they are at the 1/4 Native blood quantum, they can enroll. So you have to be persistent. And again, I guess, I know that many of the Native corporations' offices have been closed or they've been working remotely. And, I think some of the delays can be attributed to that lockdown and working remotely. So I would urge them just to be persistent, in their efforts to try to enroll, because they do have that right.
Oh, looks like there's a question here in the audience. Here,
You have to speak loud now. Oh, cool.
Hi, I was wondering if you would consider ANCSA and the...
I can't understand.
I was wondering if you would consider ANCSA and the blood quantum enactment a form of genocide.
Oh, well, I don't think when we initially, when it was initially pursued, we, the leaders who pursued ANCSA saw ANCSA as a mean for economic sovereignty. They saw it as a means for us to control our land and ensure ownership of our land. It wasn't until the 1980s, in the 1980s, when Native people began to realize the flaws of ANCSA and realize that the 1/4, the restriction on the enrollment of shareholders who were born after 1971 was a flaw. And they actually had 5 statewide conferences in which they outlined, what they thought as necessary for the cultural survival. And one of them was continued land ownership. They didn't, at that point in time, discuss the 1/4 or the blood quantum issue. We just didn't, at that point in time, those weren't the thing, we weren't thinking about it. And I have to say that I went back and I looked at that, and even I, was involved in it. And I know I pushed for perpetual enrollment of the 1/4 Native blood quantum, but I wasn't thinking about those that were less than the 1/4 Native blood quantum. But yes, if, in my opinion, this is my personal opinion, as an anthropologist, I guess it's personal opinion, I can say that as an anthropologist who has studied Alaska Native societies for the last 40 years, that I myself would see it as a threat to cultural survival and would see it as cultural genocide.
Thank you. Historically speaking, did Tlingit clans ever use blood quantum for determination of clan inclusion? What was the difference between being adopted into a clan and being born into a clan?
The whole concept of blood quantum is a new and alien concept to Native people, Indigenous people. I mean, in Native society, Indigenous societies, your rights were determined by your membership in a tribe. If you were born into that tribe, you had rights as an individual because you were a member of that tribe. You didn't secure that right from your mother or your father. It was you had that right in of your own self, even as an infant. So they didn't have any concept of blood quantum. And you will see that Alaska Native societies have adopted individuals irrespective of their blood quantum. In some societies in Alaska, we have cultural groups that enroll non-Native people as tribal members because of their cultural participation in the community.
Thank you. What are some of the hopes and outcomes of and for the scholarship recipients, especially in relation to the survival of tribal communities and membership?
Well,
thank you for your presentation.
Okay. Well, I have to say that our people have always valued higher education. They've always valued education. And when we and this is, I have to say, is one of the cultural traits that has allowed us to survive as Native people, is that we have learned to adapt. But, we have this baseline about our culture. And so our people knew that we had to learn about the new institutions that were now controlling our lives. And if we were going to have any influence or control in those new institutions that were controlling our lives, then we had to be part of that. And to be part of that, we have to be educated. And that's why our leadership established the Sealaska Scholarship Endowment. That's why our people have supported programs like internships, because we want to grow the leaders to serve in those institutions that affect our life. See, there's a question back there.
Excuse me.
So Kathleen Gallo, there are some tribes that are now gone to matrilineal or patrilineal descent. Would you support that for Alaska Natives?
Well, I would support maintaining the their traditional mechanisms for their kinship system. And of course, in our societies in Southeast, it's matrilineal. And as a proud Tlingit, a proud native of Southeast Alaska, I would vote to maintain our traditional systems, whether they be matrilineal, which it is in Southeast, but patrilineal elsewhere.
Thanks. Is there any reason for a 1/4 descendant not living in Alaska to apply to be a part of a tribe or corporation?
Is there what?
Is there a reason? Are there, why would, I guess they're asking, why would somebody who is less, than 1/4 apply if they're not in Alaska to be a part of the tribe or corporation?
Unfortunately, they can't. I mean, if they are less than the 1/4 under the current rules, unless you're from Sealaska or Arctic Slope, you have to be at the 1/4 blood quantum.
Thanks. For those of us who belong to clans that are both interior, such as Canada, and coastal Southeast, how easy would it be to share multiple tribal citizenships? So I think they're asking across the...
Oh, I think we do have a number of our people who are citizens of both Alaska and Canada.
Yeah.
I think there was a question
Okay.
over there.
Excuse me.
When you were talking about native preference, and you said that Indian status is political, can you explain that a little more? What you mean by political?
Okay. You could actually be the rights that were extended to us because of our political status, not because we are Native people, but because we are Indigenous people that owned this land. And most of the rights, stem from, this ownership of land. And so some people say, you could extend these political rights to people who are purple, it's up to the government to extend those rights, irrespective. It's not a racial. It's not because I am Tlingit that I have these legal rights. It's because that we have tribal governments, we have tribal entities, and we negotiated or we worked with the federal government as political entities, not as native people. I don't know if that explains it, but it's important to recognize that the rights that we have are based on political rights and not biological or racial preference.
I think I understand, like government-to-government relations.
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And Tish.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Another question was asking more about the 2 Native corporations that eliminated the blood quantum requirement, and what, if any, was there an impact to that elimination of the blood quantum requirement? Did it have a positive or negative impact, or?
I suspect, like I said before, enrolling new members will undoubtedly have a financial impact. And the financial impact would mean that you would receive, there would be dilution of the value of your shares and more likely your dividends. But on the other hand, I know that you would still have those other benefits as, the cultural benefits if you were able to enroll. But I don't want to ignore the financial impact. That is important to know that. So I pose that you will have the economic, conflicts versus the cultural conflict. You will have the group right versus the individual rights. There is no doubt that those conflicts would occur. But, I know for Sealaska and Arctic Slope, all of their children are recognized as members of their tribe. So you don't have that alienation within where some segment of your population would feel alienated from their own tribe and their rights. They know their cultural rights, but under the existing system, they would be alienated from those kind of rights. I think I'm all over the place on these answers. It's very complex, yes.
Well, we appreciate it. And this was a clarification to an earlier question. Is there any reason for somebody who is 1/4 or more blood quantum to apply for membership in a tribe or corporation if they live outside of Alaska?
Is there a reason why they shouldn't?
Why they, yeah.
Well, I mean, if they don't want to participate in the Native corporation, or if they don't want, that's up to them. But yeah.
Sure.
That would be an individual choice.
Okay, here's a question. My child is enrolled with Tlingit and Haida, but they are 1/8 blood quantum. Does this mean they are not a part of the tribe?
They are members of the tribe. Certainly they are members of the tribe. Unfortunately, they would not be eligible for enrollment into either their village or regional corporation.
Still waiting for more.
I also want to say it's also important to know that Native corporations, and I know people don't like to hear this, but the reality is that Native corporations are tribes for special statutory legislative acts. They are federally recognized tribes for special statutory under special statutory laws. And those special statutory laws provide benefits such as being able to participate in 8A programs, bringing financial benefits. They are tribes for land protections. They are tribes for the right for financial benefits, such as, here in Southeast even, to be able to get grants for caring for our forest lands. They do provide benefits, but they are not sovereign governing entities. Make that very clear. They are not sovereign entities. They don't seek to have governing rights, but they do seek to have those rights to protect their land and also to provide financial and other kind of benefits to their members or shareholders.
Thank you.
This is for an ad. Would you encourage some of our original Sealaska shareholders to gift their shares to these children that are not 1/4, or even to any of their children that hold shares?
I would support that. I mean, unless there's a mechanism for them to enroll. I know if I would gift, I would support that, yes, because I think they have in my opinion, this is my opinion, that they do, want to have that sense of ties to their homeland and feeling of membership, in the group. So, I mean, we actually pursued that, Sealaska was very active in the 1991 legislation. I mean, I'm proud to say that they were probably the leaders, that went to Congress to seek this right, to gift and to provide special benefits to elders, and also the right to enroll shareholders born after 1971. Leave it to my sister to ask me a hard question.
Okay. What will it take to change the Marine Mammal Protection Act requirements if ANCs are eliminating blood quantum? How would you change the Marine Mammal Protection Act?
How would we change the Marine Mammal Protection Act? Well, first of all, I'd have to say we have to be unified as Alaska Native people in the resolution or proposed amendment that we bring to Congress. Unless we as Alaska Natives are unified, we are not going to be able to change that that law. We actually tried, we passed a resolution at AFN to allow for the, to support the change to get rid of the 1/4 native blood quantum. We brought it to Congress, but our delegation wouldn't support it because there was a difference of opinion among Alaska Natives. But as I say, I do believe that we have a unified position right now, and that unified position says that it would be our tribal governments that would have the right to determine that kind of right to hunt marine mammals. And hopefully, you know, with that unified position, we will be able to persuade our delegation to make that amendment.
Thank you. Well, I'm told we have all day with you, so we have more questions. Are there any in the audience? We're still waiting, Lily, for additional questions online.
I'm fine.
Okay.
Okay. Well, David, I want to thank everyone for being such an attentive audience. I know it's a complex, these are complex issues, and they really are challenges that we face as Native people. But considering what we've come through in the last, you know, several hundred years, where we've survived people who didn't value our culture, and we survived an ugly period in our history. And I have every faith and confidence that we will survive as Native people, that we will see the right things to do. David?
Oh, great. Oh, excuse me.
So there are 500 about tribes, federally recognized tribes in the United States, 200 of which are in Alaska. In the lower 48, is there any hope for recognizing the tribes that have not been federally recognized by the United States government?
Well, I think there is. I mean, I can't recall the last tribe that was just recently recognized. These are tribes that are not federally recognized, but some of them are recognized by their state governments. But unfortunately, those that are not federally recognized are not able to participate in all of the benefits that are and protections that are provided to federally recognized tribes. So I know it's difficult, but I wouldn't give up hope, you know, because I've seen some of those tribes been battling for decades, and they have succeeded. And I can't remember the tribe that was just recently recognized by Congress.
Okay, we got more online if you have time for additional questions. Do you consider those of less than 10%, which can be a guess by part of the DNA testing companies?
What was that?
Do you consider those, I assume, who are less than 10% Native based on their genetic material by DNA testing companies? Do you consider that? I think they're asking if you consider them Native. I think is it. I'm sorry, it's a confusing.
I don't know that, if I understand the question, I don't know that DNA tests have been used to determine eligibility in tribes. That's my understanding. I know that some have tried to use genetic testing, but I do think you are still required to prove, you know, legally by kinship. And I remember I talked about base roles, and you have to be able to show that you are a descendant of someone. I don't think the genetic tests are allowed as of yet.
And here was, again, a clarification from an earlier question. I am a 1/4 descendant living outside of Alaska. I already have shares in Sealaska. Is there any reason I would want to apply for tribal membership, or is that not even an option?
It would depend. I don't know that Tlingit and Haida requires for that person to be domiciled, in Alaska. There are some tribes that require you to be a resident, of a tribe to receive the benefits. And there are benefits that certainly that Tlingit and Haida does provide. So I would check with Tlingit and Haida to find out.
Thank you. What are your thoughts on consideration of the 13th Regional Corporation shareholders being able to work with Sealaska or become shareholders?
That, in my mind, would require a legislative amendment. The 13th region was formed as an amendment to ANCSA. It was led by shareholders who were living outside and who thought it would be more beneficial to have their own regional corporation down there. But unfortunately, being a 13th regional corporation could not own Alaska, could not receive a title to Alaska land. So, yeah, my heart goes out to those in the 13th region because I know that they have been excluded, from a lot of benefits. But if you could prove that you are a lineal descendant of a shareholder, you would still be eligible for things like the scholarships.
Great. Well, I believe that summed up all of our online questions. So I believe that's
Well, thank you again.
wrapping up.
Have a
Thank
great
you.
day. Oh. I also have to say that we decided to have an impromptu celebration for the completion of the Sealaska Cultural Values 360-degree totem pole. This is really the first time in Alaska that we're going to have a 360-degree totem pole that's carved all the way around. And we've had some marvelous master carvers doing the pole. And we decided, let's have a celebration. And it's a beautiful day, even though it's, I think we have 40 or 70 mile knot winds. But we said we're strong and we want to have a celebration. So if there are any people who are in Juneau, come and join us at 3:30 for this impromptu celebration. Nancy's group will be performing, and maybe others will want to sing and dance as well. So, yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.